The morning sun painted golden streaks across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as 8-year-old Princess Charlotte skipped along the stone pathway. Her navy blue dress swished with each step, and her blonde curls bounced in the gentle breeze. She was supposed to be in her music lesson, but the call of the garden had proven too strong to resist. Charlotte loved these stolen moments of freedom. Away from the watchful eyes of her tutors and the endless protocol that governed her young life, she could simply be a child. The rose garden was her favorite hiding spot, where she could chase butterflies and imagine herself as an adventurer in far-off lands. As she rounded the corner near the ancient oak tree, she heard voices coming from the secluded alcove beyond the hedge maze. Charlotte paused, her natural curiosity getting the better of her. The voices were hushed but urgent, and she recognized one of them immediately. It was Camilla, the queen consort. "This cannot continue." Camilla's voice carried a sharp edge that Charlotte had never heard before. "The media is starting to ask questions. And if this gets out, it will destroy everything we've worked for." Charlotte crept closer, her small frame easily concealed behind the thick boxwood hedges. Through a gap in the leaves, she could see Camilla pacing back and forth, her usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious distress. With her was a man Charlotte didn't recognize, tall, wearing an expensive suit, with graying hair and cold blue eyes. "Your Majesty, we've handled situations like this before," the man replied in a smooth, calculated tone. "The family has survived worse scandals. This can be managed." "Managed?" Camilla's voice rose slightly. "This isn't just some tabloid gossip, Marcus. This could bring down the entire monarchy. The public trust we've spent years rebuilding would be shattered overnight." Charlotte pressed herself closer to the hedge, trying to understand what they were discussing. The adult conversation was confusing, filled with words and concepts beyond her young comprehension. But she could sense the gravity of their discussion. Marcus pulled out a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. "The photographs are damaging, I won't deny that. But they're also our leverage. As long as we control them, we control the narrative." Camilla stopped pacing and stared at the envelope as if it contained poison. "And what about the witness? The photographer?" "Taken care of," Marcus replied with chilling casualness. "He's been relocated to a nice facility, where he can receive the mental health treatment he clearly needs. His credibility is now questionable." Charlotte's young mind couldn't fully grasp the implications of what she was hearing, but something about the man's tone made her stomach feel twisted and wrong. She shifted slightly to get a better view, and accidentally stepped on a dry twig. The sharp crack echoed through the quiet garden. Both adults froze. Camilla's head snapped toward the hedge where Charlotte was hiding. "What was that?" Camilla whispered. Marcus was already moving, his hand reaching inside his jacket. "I'll check." Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew she should run, but fear had frozen her in place. She squeezed her eyes shut and pressed herself against the hedge, hoping they wouldn't find her. "Your Majesty!" A booming voice suddenly called out across the garden. "Your Majesty, are you out here?" Charlotte recognized the voice immediately. It was James Morrison, one of the royal protection officers. The 8-year-old had always felt safe around James. Unlike some of the other guards who treated her with stiff formality, James had a kind smile and would sometimes slip her extra biscuits during tea time. "Yes, James, I'm here," Camilla called back, her voice quickly returning to its usual composed tone. She gave Marcus a sharp look, and he stepped back, his hand moving away from his jacket. James appeared around the corner, his tall frame cutting an imposing figure in his dark suit. His trained eyes quickly swept the area, taking in the scene before him. Something about the tension in the air immediately put him on high alert. "Ma'am, forgiveness for the interruption, but Princess Charlotte appears to be missing from her music lesson. Her instructor is quite concerned." Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that James was here, but terror that she would be discovered and punished for eavesdropping. "I haven't seen the princess," Camilla replied smoothly. "Perhaps she's in the East Wing?" James nodded, but Charlotte noticed his eyes lingering on Marcus, whom he clearly didn't recognize. "And you are?" "Sir?" Marcus Thornfield, the man replied with practiced charm. I'm with the Palace Communications team. We were just discussing some upcoming events. Something flickered across James's face. A moment of doubt. Perhaps suspicion. Charlotte had heard the adults talk about how good James was at his job. How he could sense trouble before it happened. I see. Well, I should continue searching for Princess Charlotte. Ma'am. Mr. Thornfield. James nodded respectfully, but didn't move to leave immediately. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Charlotte could feel the tension like electricity in the air. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. Well, Your Majesty, I believe we've covered everything we need to discuss today. I'll be in touch regarding those matters we spoke about. Yes, of course, Camilla replied. James, perhaps you could escort Mr. Thornfield back to the main building? It wasn't really a request, and James understood. Certainly, ma'am, Mr. Thornfield, if you'll follow me. As the two men walked away, Charlotte heard James speaking in low, professional tones, asking questions about Marcus's clearance and purpose at the palace. Their voices faded as they moved toward the castle. Charlotte remained frozen behind the hedge, waiting for Camilla to leave. But instead of departing, the queen consort began walking slowly around the garden, clearly searching for something, or someone. I know someone is there, Camilla called out softly. There's no point in hiding. Come out, and we can discuss this like civilized people. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She considered making a run for it, but her legs felt like jelly. Her mind raced through the possible consequences of being discovered. Would she be in terrible trouble? Would anyone believe her if she told them what she had heard? Please, Camilla's voice took on a gentler tone. I'm not angry. I just want to talk. Against her better judgment, and perhaps because she was just a frightened 8-year-old who wanted comfort, Charlotte slowly stood up from behind the hedge. Her blue eyes were wide with fear, and her small hands trembled as she brushed leaves from her dress. Camilla's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, concern, and something else that Charlotte couldn't quite identify. Then, the queen consort's features softened into what appeared to be genuine warmth. Oh, Charlotte, darling, what are you doing out here? Shouldn't you be in your lesson? Charlotte looked down at her feet, unable to meet Camilla's eyes. I wanted to see the butterflies in the garden. I'm sorry. Camilla approached slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal. There's nothing to be sorry for, sweet girl. Gardens are meant to be enjoyed. She paused, studying Charlotte's face carefully. How long have you been here, dear? The question hung in the air like a sword. Charlotte knew that her answer would determine what happened next, but she didn't fully understand why. Her young mind struggled with the concept of lying to an adult, especially one as important as Camilla. Not very long, she whispered, which was technically true. Camilla knelt down, so she was at Charlotte's eye level. This close, Charlotte could see that despite her gentle smile, there was something anxious and calculating in the older woman's eyes. Charlotte, you know that adults sometimes have to discuss very boring, complicated things about running the country and taking care of people. Sometimes these conversations might sound scary or confusing to children, but they're really just about trying to protect everyone and keep them safe. Charlotte nodded, though she wasn't sure she understood. If you heard any grown-up talk just now, it's important that you know it was all about protecting our family and the people of Britain. Sometimes, protecting people means having difficult conversations about complicated things. Camilla's voice remained gentle, but there was an underlying firmness to it. I understand, Charlotte said quietly, though she really didn't. Camilla smiled and reached out to smooth Charlotte's hair. You're such a smart, wonderful girl. And smart girls know that some things are meant to stay private between adults. Don't they? Charlotte nodded again. Good. Now, I think we should get you back to your music lesson before anyone worries too much about where you've gone. Camilla stood and extended her hand. Shall we walk back together? As they made their way back toward the castle, Charlotte's mind churned with confusion and unease. She didn't fully understand what she had witnessed, but something about it felt wrong. The way Camilla had spoken to that man, Marcus, had been different from her usual public persona, and the way Marcus had moved when they heard the twig snap. It had seemed threatening somehow, but Charlotte was 8 years old, and 8-year-olds are taught to trust adults, especially important adults like the Queen Consort. So she pushed down her uncomfortable feelings and tried to focus on the warmth of Camilla's hand holding hers. As they reached the castle's side entrance, they encountered James Morrison returning from his escort duty. His sharp eyes immediately noticed Charlotte's slightly disheveled appearance and the leaves still clinging to her dress. "Princess Charlotte," he exclaimed, with what seemed like genuine relief. "There you are. We've been looking everywhere for you." "She was just enjoying the garden," Camilla explained smoothly. "You know how children love to explore." James's eyes moved between Camilla and Charlotte had the distinct impression that he was seeing more than the adults realized. His expression remained professionally neutral, but something in his gaze seemed to sharpen. "Of course," he said. "Princess Charlotte, your music instructor is waiting for you in the blue drawing room. Shall I escort you there?" Charlotte looked up at Camilla, who gave her an encouraging smile. "Run along, dear, and remember what we talked about." As James and Charlotte walked through the castle corridors, the guard kept glancing down at the young princess. His protective instincts, honed by years of military and security training, were telling him that something was amiss. "Princess," he said gently as they approached the music room, "if you ever need to talk to someone about anything at all, you know you can always come to me. Right?" Charlotte looked up at his kind face and felt a warmth in her chest. Here was someone who made her feel safe, someone who seemed to genuinely care about her well-being. "Yes, James, I know. Good. That's what I'm here for. To keep you and your family safe and happy." As Charlotte disappeared into her music lesson, James stood in the corridor for a moment, thinking. His encounter with Marcus Thornfield had raised several red flags. The man's credentials had checked out when James called them in, but something about him had felt off, and finding Charlotte in the garden, clearly having been hiding, with evidence of vegetation on her clothes, suggested she might have witnessed something. James made a mental note to do some discreet checking on Mr. Marcus Thornfield and to keep a closer eye on Princess Charlotte over the next few days. In his experience, when something felt wrong, it usually was. Meanwhile, in the music room, Charlotte sat at the piano bench, her small fingers moving mechanically across the keys as her instructor guided her through scales. But her mind wasn't on music. It was replaying the conversation she had overheard, trying to make sense of the fear in Camilla's voice and the cold calculation in Marcus's tone. She thought about Camilla's words, about protecting people and keeping things private, but she also remembered the way Marcus had reached inside his jacket when they heard the twigs snap, and the way he had spoken about someone being taken care of, and their credibility being questionable. Charlotte was young, but she wasn't naive. She had heard enough adult conversations around the castle to understand that sometimes people did bad things and then tried to cover them up. She had seen enough movies and read enough books to know that sometimes the people who seemed nice on the outside were actually dangerous. As her piano lesson continued, one thought kept circling in her young mind. She needed to tell someone what she had heard, but Camilla's gentle warning echoed alongside that thought, creating a confusing tangle of loyalty, fear, and uncertainty. The afternoon sun slanted through the music room windows, and Charlotte continued to play, her music mixing with the sound of her own troubled thoughts. Outside, the garden where she had hidden just hours before looked peaceful and innocent, giving no hint of the secrets that had been shared in its shadows. But secrets, as Charlotte was beginning to learn, have a way of growing larger and more dangerous the longer they remain hidden, and sometimes, even 8-year-old princesses find themselves holding secrets that could change everything. 3 weeks had passed since Charlotte's encounter in the garden, and the young princess found herself changed in ways she couldn't quite articulate. The carefree girl who had once skipped through castle corridors now walked with a more measured step, her bright eyes often distant and thoughtful. James Morrison had noticed the change immediately. As one of the senior protection officers assigned to the Wales family, he had developed a keen eye for reading the moods and behaviors of his charges. Charlotte's newfound quietness concerned him, particularly given the strange circumstances under which he had found her that day in the garden. His discreet inquiries into Marcus Thornfield had yielded interesting results. While the man's credentials with the Palace Communications team were legitimate, his background was far more complex than a simple PR consultant. Thornfield had connections to several private security firms and had previously worked with various government agencies in what were diplomatically termed sensitive communications matters. On this particular morning, James was conducting his routine security sweep of the family wing when he noticed Charlotte sitting alone in the library, a large book open in her lap but her gaze fixed on something far beyond the pages. "Good morning, Princess Charlotte," he said gently, not wanting to startle her. Charlotte looked up with a start, then smiled when she saw it was James. "Good morning, James." "That looks like quite an interesting book," he observed, noting that she was reading about British history, specifically about royal scandals throughout the centuries. "It is," she replied, though her voice lacked its usual enthusiasm. "I was reading about King Edward VIII and how he had to give up being king because of Mrs. Simpson." James raised an eyebrow. It was unusual for someone Charlotte's age to be interested in such complex political and social history. "That's quite advanced reading for someone your age. What made you interested in that particular story?" Charlotte closed the book and looked up at James with eyes that seemed far older than her 8 years. "James, if someone in the royal family did something really bad, would they have to give up being royal too?" The question struck James as both innocent and loaded with implications. He sat down in the chair across from her, choosing his words carefully. "Well, that would depend on many factors, Princess. But the most important thing to remember is that if someone has done something wrong, the right thing to do is usually to tell someone who can help fix the situation." Charlotte nodded solemnly, then asked, "But what if telling would hurt a lot of people? What if it would make people very sad or scared?" James felt a chill run down his spine. This was clearly not hypothetical curiosity from a child. "Charlotte, is there something specific you're worried about? Something you think you should tell someone?" For a moment, Charlotte looked as though she might speak. Her mouth opened slightly, and James could see the internal struggle playing out across her young features. But then, as if remembering something, she shook her head. "I was just wondering," she said. But her voice was unconvincing. Before James could press further, the library door opened and Camilla entered, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She looked surprised to see Charlotte and James in conversation. "Oh, Charlotte, there you are. I've been looking for you." Camilla's smile was warm, but James noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We have that charity event this afternoon, remember? The one with the children's hospital?" Charlotte's face brightened slightly at the mention of the charity work. Despite her recent troubled thoughts, she still loved the opportunities to meet other children and help with important causes. "I remember," she said, closing her history book and standing up. "Wonderful. Why don't you go get ready? I believe your stylist is waiting for you." Camilla watched as Charlotte gathered her book and headed for the door, then turned to James. "Thank you for keeping an eye on her, James." "Of course, ma'am, it's my pleasure." James stood as well, but made no immediate move to leave. Camilla seemed to sense his lingering presence. "Was there something else?" "Actually, ma'am, I wanted to mention that I've noticed Princess Charlotte seems a bit subdued lately. I was wondering if there was anything I should be aware of that might be troubling her." Camilla's expression remained carefully neutral. "Children go through phases, don't they? She's been working very hard with her tutors lately. Perhaps she's just tired." "Of course," James replied, though he wasn't convinced. "I just want to make sure she feels comfortable coming to any of us if she needs anything. Naturally, we all want what's best for Charlotte." There was something in Camilla's tone that suggested the conversation was over. But also something else. A subtle warning, perhaps. As James left the library, he couldn't shake the feeling that Charlotte was carrying a burden far too heavy for someone her age. His protective instincts were in overdrive, and his years of experience in security work had taught him to trust those instincts. Later that afternoon, at the Children's Hospital charity event, Charlotte performed her royal duties with the grace and charm expected of someone in her position. She smiled for photographers, spoke kindly to the sick children, and participated in all the planned activities. But James, watching from his position near the wall, could see the effort it was taking. It was during the event that something unexpected happened. One of the photographers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle manner, approached Charlotte during a quiet moment. "Princess Charlotte," she said softly, "I'm Sarah Mitchell from the London Chronicle. I was wondering if I could ask you a quick question for our story." Charlotte nodded politely, as she had been trained to do. "What's your favorite part about visiting the children here at the hospital?" It was a standard, safe question. The kind Charlotte had answered dozens of times before, but instead of giving her usual rehearsed response about wanting to help sick children feel better, Charlotte paused and looked thoughtful. "I like that here. Everyone tells the truth about how they're feeling," she said slowly. "When children are sick, nobody pretends everything is perfect. They say they're scared or sad or in pain, and then the doctors and nurses can help them get better." Sarah was struck by the unexpected depth of the answer. "That's a very wise observation. Do you think it's always important to tell the truth, even when it's difficult?" Charlotte looked directly into the photographer's eyes with an intensity that was startling. "Yes," she said firmly. "Even when it's scary. Even when adults tell you that some truths should stay secret." And James, who had been monitoring the conversation from a distance, felt his blood run cold. He moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary, but Sarah seemed as surprised by Charlotte's response as he was. That's a very mature way to think about things," Sarah said carefully. Before Charlotte could respond further, Camilla appeared at her side, having materialized seemingly from nowhere. "Charlotte, darling, I think it's time we moved on to the next activity," she said smoothly, placing a protective hand on the young princess's shoulder. "Of course," Sarah said, though she seemed reluctant to end the conversation. "Thank you, Princess Charlotte. Your words were very illuminating." As they walked away, James noticed Camilla's grip on Charlotte's shoulder tighten slightly, and he saw the child's posture become more rigid. The rest of the event passed without incident, but James couldn't stop thinking about Charlotte's words to the photographer. The child was clearly trying to communicate something, though he wasn't sure if she even fully understood what she was doing. That evening, as the royal family settled in for dinner, James was conducting his evening security rounds when he heard voices coming from one of the private sitting rooms. He recognized Camilla's voice immediately, and from the urgent tone, he could tell this wasn't a casual conversation. Moving closer but remaining professionally discreet, he positioned himself where he could observe the entrance to the room while still maintaining his security duties. "Cannot continue to speak so freely," Camilla was saying. This afternoon's comment to that photographer was completely inappropriate. "I didn't say anything wrong," came Charlotte's voice, small but defiant. "Charlotte, we've discussed this. There are certain things that children don't need to worry about. When you make statements about truth-telling and secrets, people might misunderstand and think you're referring to something specific." "But what if I am referring to something specific?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. James felt his muscles tense, ready to act if necessary, though he wasn't entirely sure what action might be required. "Charlotte," Camilla's voice took on a firmer tone. "You're 8 years old. Sometimes children think they understand adult situations when they really don't. Sometimes, what seems like one thing is actually something completely different. But what if it's not? What if I really did understand?" James heard the sound of footsteps pacing across the room. "Listen to me very carefully," Camilla said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "There are people in this world who would love nothing more than to hurt our family. They would take innocent words from a child and twist them into something dangerous. That's why it's so important that certain conversations stay private. Like the conversation with the man in the garden, the silence that followed was so profound that James could hear his own heartbeat. When Camilla finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "Yes," she said simply, "like that conversation. But James says that if someone does something wrong, the right thing to do is to tell someone who can help. James is a wonderful man who wants to protect you. But sometimes, protecting someone means protecting them from information that could hurt them or others. Even if the information is true? Especially if the information is true." James felt like he was listening to a child's innocence being systematically dismantled. Charlotte was being taught to doubt her own perceptions and moral instincts in favor of protecting some unnamed secret. "I'm confused." Charlotte's voice was small and lost. "I know, sweetheart. And that's exactly why these adult matters need to stay with adults. You don't need to carry the weight of confusing grown-up problems. But I already am carrying it." The simple, honest statement seemed to hit Camilla like a physical blow. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler, but no less firm. "Then let's find a way to help you put that weight down. Would you like that?" "Yes," Charlotte whispered. "Good. The first step is to promise me that you won't discuss what you think you heard that day with anyone else. Not James. Not your parents. Not friends. Not photographers. Can you make that promise?" James found himself holding his breath, waiting for Charlotte's response. "What if someone asks me directly? Then you tell them that you don't know what they're talking about. Because really, Charlotte, an 8-year-old couldn't possibly understand the complexities of what you think you overheard." The manipulation was subtle but effective. Camilla was convincing Charlotte that her own perceptions were unreliable, that her age made her incapable of understanding what she had witnessed. "I promise," Charlotte said finally, though her voice sounded hollow. "That's my brave girl. Now, let's not speak of this again. Let's focus on all the wonderful things in your life. Your family, your education, your charity work. Those are the things that matter." 1. James heard the sound of movement and quickly repositioned himself to avoid being discovered. As Camilla and Charlotte emerged from the sitting room, he noted the child's subdued posture and the satisfied expression on Camilla's face. After they had passed, James remained in position, his mind racing through the implications of what he had just overheard. A child had witnessed something significant enough to require active suppression. Someone was working very hard to ensure that Charlotte's observations remained buried. His protective instincts were screaming that Charlotte was in danger. Perhaps not physical danger, but certainly psychological and emotional danger. She was being gaslit by an adult in a position of authority, taught to doubt her own perceptions and moral compass. But James also understood the complexity of his position. He was an employee of the royal family, sworn to protect them from all threats, including threats to their reputation and stability. If Charlotte had indeed witnessed something that could damage the monarchy, intervening on her behalf could be seen as betraying his oath of service. Yet, as he walked through the castle corridors that night, checking locks and reviewing security protocols, James found himself thinking not about his oath to the crown, but about his oath to protect the innocent. And right now, Princess Charlotte seemed like a very innocent child who needed protection from forces she didn't understand. That night, Charlotte lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling of her elegant bedroom. The conversation with Camilla had left her feeling more confused than ever. She wanted to believe that the adults in her life had her best interests at heart. But something deep in her chest felt tight and wrong. She thought about the man in the garden, Marcus, and the way he had talked about making someone's credibility questionable. She thought about the envelope he had shown Camilla and the fear in the queen consort's eyes. She thought about James's kind face and his promise that she could always come to him with problems. But she had made a promise to Camilla. She had given her word that she would keep the secret. As Charlotte finally drifted off to sleep, she didn't notice the figure standing quietly in the hallway outside her room. James Morrison stood there for several minutes, watching over the child who had somehow found herself at the center of something far larger and more dangerous than anyone her age should ever have to face. Tomorrow, he decided, he would have to make some very difficult decisions about where his loyalties truly lay. The breaking point came exactly 1 month after Charlotte's discovery in the garden. Though it arrived in a way no one could have predicted, James Morrison had spent weeks conducting discreet inquiries into Marcus Thornfield and his connections to various private intelligence networks. What he discovered painted a picture of a man who specialized in what the security world euphemistically called reputation management. The art of burying inconvenient truths and discrediting those who threaten to expose them. On this particular morning, James was reviewing security footage from the previous day when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the footage from the East Wing, he could see Marcus Thornfield entering through a service entrance. an entrance that required high-level clearance and prior authorization. There was no record of Thornfield's visit in the official logs. This meant either someone with significant authority had authorized an off-books meeting, or Thornfield had gained access through other means. Neither possibility was acceptable from a security standpoint. James immediately began checking other security footage and discovered that Thornfield had been making unauthorized visits to the castle regularly over the past month, always using different entrances, and always during times when most of the royal family was occupied with official duties. But yesterday had been different. Yesterday, Princess Charlotte had been home from school with a minor cold. With growing alarm, James pulled up the interior security footage and traced Thornfield's movements through the castle. His path had taken him through several private areas before ending at the library. The same library where Charlotte often spent her quiet time. The footage showed Thornfield entering the library at 2:47 p.m. 3 minutes later, it showed Charlotte entering the same room. The timestamp indicated she had been alone with Thornfield for nearly 20 minutes before James himself had appeared, conducting his routine rounds. James's hands were shaking as he fast-forwarded through the footage. When he saw Charlotte emerge from the library, her face was pale and her usual confident stride had been replaced by a hesitant, uncertain walk. She looked like a child who had been frightened. Without hesitation, James saved the footage and began preparing a security report. But before he could submit it through official channels, his secure phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Officer Morrison, we need to speak immediately. It concerns Princess Charlotte's safety. Meet me at the Stag's Head pub in Eton at 6 p.m. Come alone. A friend who wants to help." James stared at the message, every instinct telling him it could be a trap. But the mention of Charlotte's safety overrode his caution. If someone else had noticed what was happening and wanted to help protect the young princess, he needed to hear what they had to say. At 6 p.m. sharp, James entered the small pub in Eton, his eyes scanning the crowd for anyone who seemed out of place. A woman in her 50s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes, raised her hand slightly from a corner booth. James approached cautiously. "Officer Morrison, thank you for coming. I'm Detective Inspector Sarah Hartley, Metropolitan Police." She showed him her identification discreetly. "I've been investigating Marcus Thornfield for the past 6 months." James sat down across from her, keeping his voice low. "In what capacity?" "Thornfield is suspected of being involved in a network that specializes in silencing witnesses and victims of high-profile crimes. We believe he uses a combination of blackmail, intimidation, and psychological manipulation to keep people quiet." "And you think he's targeting Princess Charlotte?" "I think Princess Charlotte witnessed something she shouldn't have, and now she's being systematically groomed to remain silent about it." Sarah leaned forward. "We've been monitoring some of Thornfield's communications. He's been reporting to someone very high up in the royal hierarchy about his progress with the young witness." James felt sick. What kind of progress? Psychological conditioning, making her doubt her own perceptions, creating fear about the consequences of speaking up, and most importantly, establishing a relationship of dependence and trust that he can exploit. She's 8 years old, which makes her both vulnerable and valuable. Children her age can be convinced that they misunderstood what they saw, or that speaking up would hurt people they love. It's a particularly cruel form of manipulation. Sarah pulled out a tablet and showed James several photographs. These were taken over the past month. Thornfield has been meeting with Charlotte regularly when she's alone in the castle. The photos showed Charlotte and Thornfield in various locations around Windsor. The library, a small sitting room, even the garden where Charlotte had first overheard the conversation. In each image, Thornfield appeared to be speaking earnestly to Charlotte, who looked increasingly small and subdued. "Why hasn't this been reported through official channels?" James asked. "Because we suspect the person Thornfield is reporting to has the authority to bury any official investigation. We need someone on the inside who cares more about protecting Charlotte than protecting the institution." James studied Sarah's face, looking for any sign of deception. His training had taught him to be suspicious of approaches like this, but everything she was telling him aligned with his own observations and concerns. "What do you need from me?" "We need evidence of what Charlotte originally witnessed. We need her to feel safe enough to tell someone what she saw. And we need to document Thornfield's manipulation tactics. And if what she witnessed could bring down the monarchy," Sarah's expression hardened, "then maybe it should be brought down. The protection of children comes before the protection of institutions." James spent the rest of the evening thinking about Sarah's words. When he returned to the castle, he found Charlotte sitting alone in the small conservatory, staring out at the garden where everything had begun. "Princess Charlotte," he said gently, sitting down beside her. "How are you feeling?" Charlotte turned to look at him, and James was struck by how much older she seemed than just a month ago. "I'm confused, James." "About what?" "About everything. About what's right and what's wrong. About what I should do." James felt his heart break for this child who was carrying such an impossible burden. "You know, when I was in the army, I learned something important about right and wrong." Charlotte looked up at him with interest. "I learned that the right thing to do is almost always the thing that protects innocent people, even if it's scary or difficult." "But what if protecting innocent people means hurting other people? Then you have to decide which people deserve protection more. The innocent ones, or the ones who might be doing something wrong." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "James, if I told you something very important, something that might change everything, would you promise to keep me safe?" "I would promise to do everything in my power to protect you, no matter what. Even if important adults told you not to?" "Especially then." Charlotte took a deep breath, and James could see her making a decision that would change everything. "A month ago, I heard Camilla talking to a man named Marcus in the garden. They were talking about photographs that could hurt the royal family, and about someone who had been taken care of because they knew too much." James kept his expression calm, though his heart was racing. "What kind of photographs?" "I don't know exactly. But Marcus had them in an envelope, and Camilla was scared of what would happen if people saw them. She said it could bring down the monarchy." "And what happened after you heard this conversation?" "Marcus has been visiting me. He says he's helping me understand that what I heard wasn't what I thought it was. He says that children often misunderstand adult conversations, and that I should trust him to help me remember correctly." "Remember correctly?" "He says that Camilla and he were just discussing a charity photography project that had run into some complications. He says that's what I really heard, and that my imagination filled in the scary parts." James felt rage building in his chest. This man had been systematically gaslighting an 8-year-old child, convincing her to doubt her own perceptions and memories. "Charlotte, what do you believe? Not what Marcus tells you to believe, not what anyone else says. What does your heart tell you about what you heard?" Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "I believe that something bad happened, and that someone is trying to hide it, and that people might get hurt if the truth doesn't come out. Then we need to make sure the truth comes out. But Camilla said it would hurt innocent people. The only innocent person I'm worried about right now is you." As James spoke those words, they heard footsteps approaching the conservatory. Charlotte's eyes widened with fear, and she grabbed James's arm. "It's him," she whispered. "It's Marcus." James stood up, positioning himself between Charlotte and the entrance. Marcus Thornfield appeared in the doorway, his usual charming smile faltering slightly when he saw James. "Princess Charlotte, there you are. I was hoping we could continue our conversation from earlier." Marcus's eyes flicked to James. "Officer Morrison, perhaps you could give us some privacy?" "Actually," James said calmly, "I think Princess Charlotte has had enough private conversations for one day." Something cold and dangerous flashed in Marcus's eyes. "I'm afraid this isn't really your decision to make, Officer Morrison. When it comes to Princess Charlotte's safety and well-being, it absolutely is my decision." The two men stared at each other for a moment, the tension in the room becoming palpable. Charlotte pressed closer to James, her small hand clutching his sleeve. "James," she whispered, so quietly that only he could hear. "I won't tell." The words hit James like a physical blow. This brave, intelligent child was offering to sacrifice her own truth to protect him from whatever consequences Marcus might be threatening. But James had made his decision weeks ago, sitting outside Charlotte's bedroom door. His loyalty was to her, not to the institution that was allowing her to be manipulated and silenced. "Actually, Princess Charlotte," James said loudly enough for Marcus to hear clearly, "I think it's time you told someone in authority exactly what you heard in the garden that day. All of it. Every word." Marcus stepped forward, his charming mask finally slipping completely. "Officer Morrison, you're making a very serious mistake. The only mistake would be letting this continue." James pulled out his phone and began dialing. "I'm calling Detective Inspector Sarah Hartley of the Metropolitan Police. She's very interested in hearing Princess Charlotte's story." "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Marcus snarled. "This is bigger than one little girl's imagination." "You're right," James said as the phone connected. "It's about protecting children from people who would manipulate and silence them." As Sarah answered the call, James kept his eyes on Marcus, ready to physically defend Charlotte if necessary. But Marcus simply stood there for a moment, his calculating mind clearly weighing his options. Finally, he smiled his cold smile one more time. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away. Charlotte looked up at James with something approaching hero worship in her eyes. "You really meant it. You really chose to protect me." "Every time, Princess. Every single time." 3 hours later, Charlotte sat in a comfortable interview room at Windsor Police Station, with James beside her and Sarah Hartley across the table. A child psychologist and a representative from social services were also present, ensuring that Charlotte felt safe and supported. "Tell us about the day in the garden," Sarah said gently, and Charlotte did. She told them everything. About the conversation she had overheard. About the envelope of photographs. About the mysterious person who had been taken care of. About Marcus's visits and his attempts to convince her that she had misunderstood everything. As she spoke, James watched her posture change. With each word of truth she spoke, she seemed to grow stronger, more confident, more like the bright, brave child she had always been. When she finished, Sarah leaned forward with a gentle smile. "Charlotte, you are the bravest person I've ever met. What you've done today will help protect a lot of people." "Will I get in trouble?" Charlotte asked. "No, sweetheart. You'll be protected. That's what James is here for, and that's what we're here for." Charlotte looked up at James. "You kept your promise. I always will." Outside the interview room, Sarah briefed James on what would happen next. The investigation into Marcus Thornfield and his activities would expand, with Charlotte's testimony providing the key to unlocking a much larger conspiracy. "What about Camilla?" James asked. "That depends on what the photographs contain, and what her level of involvement actually was. It's possible she was also being manipulated, threatened into compliance. We'll know more as the investigation progresses." As they prepared to leave the station, Charlotte tugged on James's sleeve. "James, do you think I did the right thing?" James knelt down to her level, looking directly into her eyes. "You did the bravest, most right thing a person can do. You told the truth, even when it was scary." "Will things be different now?" "Yes, they will. But different doesn't always mean worse. Sometimes it means better, safer, more honest." Charlotte smiled for the first time in weeks. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I feel lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy and now I can put it down." "That's exactly what you've done." As they drove back to Windsor Castle, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Charlotte sat beside James in the back seat of the police car, no longer a frightened child carrying an impossible secret, but a young person who had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is speak the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. The investigation that followed would indeed change everything. It would reveal a network of corruption and manipulation that reached into the highest levels of government and society. It would lead to arrests, resignations, and reforms that would strengthen protections for witnesses and victims. But for Charlotte, the most important change was simpler and more personal. She had learned that she could trust her own perceptions, that her voice mattered, and that there were adults in the world who would choose to protect children over institutions. Truth over convenience, and what was right over what was easy. And James Morrison had learned that sometimes the most important oath a protector can take is not to an institution or a crown, but to the innocent people who depend on them to do the right thing, no matter the cost. As they approached the castle gates, Charlotte reached over and took James's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you," he replied, "for being brave enough to trust me with the truth." The truth, as it turned out, had indeed set them free.